You're watching Booze Hackers. So, Adrian, we're back for another week, and we have a special guest star with us tonight, Chris Crawley, to talk to us about Mezcal, of which I'm going to admit I don't know jack and or shit about, except for the fact that I've got some tequila in a margarita, and that's my knowledge. So,
Very
Yeah,
nice.
I
Very
know.
nice.
I know just about nothing. Also, I do have a friend that once in Denver took me to a bar where they had a good selection and kind of schooled me on the different things. But it's been a couple of years. I've forgotten all that. I know I've had some good tequila and some good mezcal, like stuff that you would drink neat or on the rocks. But I've forgotten all that, so I'm excited to learn it again.
Very cool. Yeah. So tequila is also an agave. Tequila is basically only blue agave. It's a specific thing. It comes from Jalisco province. Tends to be like more floral. Tends to have a sort of a more refined flavor. Mezcal actually uses a number of different agave types. And I'll talk about a couple of them, but the most popular one by far is Espadin. And by the way, my Spanish is terrible, so if I butcher the pronunciations, I'm really sorry.
no,
But
that's fine because
that is one of the only useful things I can help with.
Okay,
when
perfect.
we do Scotch, it's going to be a really interesting episode.
Indeed,
So
I think
I did grab some bottles, and I'm going to wait to reveal them. I'm going to wait until we hear some more about it. So I'm going
yeah,
to go and start unwrapping them and pouring a little bit.
excellent. Yeah,
And
that's a good idea. It's nice to get a little liquid courage, talk about what you think. So it's definitely good. Well, so mezcal usually is espadin, but you get a lot of different types, and so the type of agave has a tremendous influence on what the flavor that comes through is. There's some agaves that are enormous. You know, you'll see these pictures of them. They take like 25 to 30 years to mature. And it's interesting. The mescaleros will have to decide, you know, after 25 years of this plant growing, like, do I want to let this plant go to seed and like reproduce, or do I want to make a batch of agave, or a batch of mezcal out of this particular agave? So it's like the thing is going to basically, if it goes to seed, it's going to take all that energy that it's been like building up into the plant and give it to the seeds, and then basically those are going to disperse. If they stop it before it goes to seed, then they'll harvest it, and it's this enormous thing. And you'll see videos of people like, you know, slicing off the big fronds that are coming out of it, and then they'll
Right.
basically cut into it, dig it up, you know, move it off, and then haul it out of the desert. And so my understanding most of the time in talking to the different mescaleros and the palenques is that they go up into there's some common lands that sometimes people have private property, but it's a lot of times it's common lands, and they'll go harvest these different agave, and then that actually has a big influence in terms of the flavor. So for me, you know, if I'm looking at a menu and there are a bunch of different agaves and I look on it, when I see espadines, I'm kind of like, well, that's probably more farm raised. It's, you know, it's easier to do. It tends to have a mellower flavor. If I see a tobala on there, I tend to like tobalas. They're smaller. They tend to have a strong flavor, and the flavor tends to be, you know, more in the like clay earthy kind of family of flavors. There are some other ones, a lot of the, you know, the tepezate type, you know, flavoring that comes through will be, tends to be more on like the citrus grass kind of stuff. The flavor profile that most people pick up in mezcal the first time they taste it is like smoke. They just taste all the smoke.
Mm.
And that tends to come from the fact that in order to get the plants ready, they take the plants, whichever ones they've harvested, whichever ones they have, and they'll actually build a wood fire in an earthen pit, line it with rock, and then they build the fire, and then they cover that with some dirt, and then they put like not tarps, but like a canvas kind of fabric, and then they put a bunch of the plants on top of that, and then they bury that and they let it roast for basically like 3 days.
Oh
So you
wow!
get this like wood smoke permeating because it's a low smoldering kind of cooking process. After they cook it, they process it a couple different ways. They'll either do like the super traditional way, which is these big like hammers, these big wood hammers that they'll mash it with, or they have sometimes they'll have a donkey on like a circular thing that's got like a big sort of like wheel, and the donkey they'll have it march around, and that'll smash the roasted agave plant. Or the more modern is they have a shredder, and they'll just like dump all this stuff into the shredder. After they break it down that way, they then do an open vat fermentation, and so the fermentation is usually in wood, and on some of the bottles.
So before you get too much
sorry.
into the fermentation,
Sorry.
I've already got a few questions.
Of course.
I want to stop you before you get too far. So agave, I think most people know we're talking about cactus, but are all cactus agave, or is agave a particular like genus of cactus or something like that?
Yeah, so my understanding is not all cactus are agave. The agave plant is one family of a specific sort of cactus. And
so nobody's making mezcal out of saguaro or
no. That's not what they're making. That's not what they're making it out of. But they have like I said, the blue agave is basically like when you make tequila, you're only going to use that
right.
one, right?
I found it also interesting. You're talking about getting it before it flowers, because a lot of herbs are the same way. I used to have gardens, and like cilantro, like the taste will change. A lot of these herbs
dramatically, right?
Yeah. If you let it start flowering, yeah.
Yeah, and so from my understanding about the agave plant, the way that this thing works is that it's like it's a desert plant, right? And so it's pretty much got like one shot to reproduce, and so it's been storing all these sugars, and then it's ready to go, and it's like time for me to reproduce. And basically the people making the mezcal are trying to optimize that. They don't want it to put too much energy into making the seed yet. They want to get it so that it's like it's got all of this abundance of stored sugar that they can then get the roasting on.
We might have to change the rating on this episode.
So similar to the winemaking process, right, is that you're going to pick that fruit at the height of its sweetness, because you want all that sugar in the fruit for the fermentation process.
Yeah.
So with the smoking process, is that for a flavor profile? Are they trying to dry it out so they can process it, like you were talking about, like basically on a mill?
Yeah, so it's not very dry at all. Like when it comes out of that fire, it's wet. It's like super like soft, and you'll see it. You could take it and just like, now it's very fibrous. It's basically to get those sugars kind of caramelized, and it changes.
Okay, so you're trying to actually cook the agave then?
Yeah, they cook it,
dry it out, or
no, not dried at all.
I've eaten cactus, so yeah, it's like that when they grill it and they give it to you. Also, it's really wet.
Yep.
Excuse me.
Yeah. So it's so they'll do that. They'll cook it for a while, and then it's like a very slow cook, sort of extended process. And then after they've done that, it's interesting. Like I've eaten that like as it's come off of the fire pit, and like I can taste like the flavors that are in that like will become the bottle. I can taste those flavors.
Oh, yeah.
But it's like the candy version,
Okay.
there's like no alcohol to it yet. And it's got this sweet, like dank sweetness. It's got the smokiness just from the processing aspect of it, of like it's been sitting in a fire pit for days. And so the other thing is that actually, like, I like smoke flavor. I mean, when I drink, whiskeys and scotches, I want smokiness in there. A lot of times, a lot of the nicer mezcals will not have a lot of residual smoke flavor in it. Like it's one of those things where, in some cases, they kind of feel like we can make that go away. Like that smoking and the flavor associated with it is a result of the cooking. And so then if they distill things out, then they can, in many cases, end up getting rid of it. And so a lot of what's considered nicer mezcal doesn't actually have a really strong smoky flavor.
Okay. Okay. It's more delicate.
Yeah, it's complicated. It's like the things that I like in it, and there's a range. And there are two things that I'll say about that. Number one is like most mezcal is small batch,
Mhm.
and you're going to get like a real like seasonal variation from year to year to year. There's this one bottle of mezcal that I had several years ago. I tasted it and I was like, that is the best mezcal I ever had. And it was Oaxaca. They spell the brand Wahaka, Oaxaca brand, their Vino de Mezcal series. And it's this one particular batch from I'm trying to remember which year. I think it was like 14 or something like that. There were 70 or 80 bottles, 78 or liter bottles made. And I had some of it in Australia. That was the first place I tasted it. And then the only other place that I've tasted it, and I just had another glass of it, was in Chicago at Rick Bayless's restaurant, Frontera Grill and Zoco and Topolobampo. And it's just like, I know that like basically all the bottles of that particular batch that exist at Rick Bayless's restaurant, because
Wow.
they're probably all gone. And I think that he probably bought half of that one batch,
Wow.
So yeah, it's just like, it's one of those things where it's like they make it. Lots of times you'll see on the bottle how many liters there were, and
Oh, really?
sometimes it's like, oh yeah, it'll say like this one is 54 of 64. So this bottle is probably can't see it, but it says
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I can
54,
see it. It's
64.
numbered. Yeah.
Yeah, so 64 liters in that one batch, and that was like this particular one. That was what they harvested at that time. They made that batch. They'll make a similar one later, but it's like it's not going to have the same flavor profile exactly as this.
So are the distillers going for a specific flavor profile, or they go, nope, this is what the plant gave us this day, and next day we're going to get a different flavor? Because I know Scotch kind of does that somewhat.
Mhm.
And then, whiskey, you talk about small batch, but even then the distiller's looking for a specific flavor profile, right? There's a reason Jack Daniels tastes like Jack Daniels year after year after year.
Sure.
Beam, right? All those whiskeys. So is that ever a goal with these people, or is it just, nope, this is what we got today? And
Right. Consistency or not, right?
Well, so I think that they're like, they realize the value of the consistency. So as a specific brand, like everybody's probably heard of Vita. Like when you go to most bars, if they have a mezcal, it'll be in a bottle that looks like this, and it's Del Maguey is the brand, and the very well known mezcal that a lot of places stock is Vita. Yeah, exactly. So Del Maguey, that's the Chichicapa though, isn't it?
Yeah. Chichicapa.
Yeah, exactly. Which is that's a single village one where they'll go to a palenque and basically get someone to make it. And then it'll say on the back some more details of like what was actually made. And so there are this is my understanding, and it's like, this is derived from talking to people who are making it. There are some people who have like the capability to build out a processing so that they can get consistency. Then there are some other people who are like just really good at doing it, and they'll get consistency because they're using essentially the same process over and over again. And then there are some folks, and this one is one that I got at a trip a couple of years ago. The guy's name who made this is Isaac Martinez, and so like when he made this batch of mezcal, this was the stuff that he had on hand. So this is a mix of espadín and coyote, two different types of agaves. And so it's like basically this is what he had on hand when he made it. And he just did like his best of, okay, I'm going to take a little bit of this. I know what this plant tends to taste like. This espadín is going to be like rich and sugary and fatty. This coyote is going to have a lot of like strong flavors. So I'm going to blend these two together. And what they do is or what they don't do is blend post distillation. Like the palenques, they will decide, I'm going to take this portion of this, this stuff that I've got, these agaves and these agaves and these agaves, I'm going to mix them together. I'm going to ferment them. I'm going to distill them. And that's the batch that I'm going to get.
That term palenques, is that what you call it before it's fermented?
The palenque is actually the distillery.
Okay.
Yeah. So the Palenque is the name of the distillery. That's
Okay.
what a distillery is called in that region
Is
of.
there a name for the liquid? You know, because I know different spirits have different, like with beer, it's wort, you know,
Yeah.
before it's fermented.
There is a name. I honestly though can't remember it. Like I said, my Spanish is pretty
Okay.
terrible, and I know that they say it, but I just don't know. I just don't know what it is. So
Okay.
there's the fermentation, and I'm going to jump back to that thread I was talking about earlier in terms of the fermentation. After they've processed it and mashed it, they do these open wood vat fermentation,
Hmm.
and it goes for days. And so
Really?
yeah, so they just like, and it's
But so you're potentially getting wild yeast and
yeah, all
bacteria.
sorts
Right.
of
So it's like
flies and whatever
you
else.
just have stuff coming in, and you
Yeah,
don't know what's going in there.
yeah. So it's like they've got these enormous, typically wood barrels that they'll fill up. They will sort of like they'll listen to the side of the barrel for like the bubbling and stuff like that to
Yeah.
get it going on, making sure that there's actually the actual fermentation happening to get the alcohol there, and then they typically do two distillation processes. So they take after they've decided, okay, this is, it's been 4 days, and a lot of times it's kind of like hot in the day, cold in the nighttime. So you also getting like temperature variations on that fermentation aspect. But so then they'll do two distillations, but then sometimes they do a third distillation, and this is when you might see this term pachuga. So
Okay.
pachuga means breast, and so there's sort of a terminology or labeling for a special batch. It's called a pechuga. They don't always include the chicken breast. Sometimes it's turkey. Some places have sort of changed it around and done some lamb or other things. But then there's also usually stone fruit and apple and some citrus and stuff all thrown into the distillation pot for the third distillation. And then you get a lot of like sort of additional and interesting flavors in pechugas. And so this particular brand, Don Mateo, their pechuga, I love it. It's like if I see this on a menu someplace, I'm just like, oh, that's great. Like if there's nothing else that I haven't had before, I'll definitely get that, because this is consistent and they make this pechuga like all the time. So you can pretty much always find it stocked. Other places, their pechuga, they might make it, they might not. It's just a matter of what the person doing the distillation decides to do.
So are these chicken breasts cooked before they toss them?
No.
No. Okay.
No. So from what I'm seeing, they and they have these like big basically like distillation vats. And so what's going to happen is, and I'll talk about the couple of different types that they have, but what's going to happen is you're going to get the fire underneath the distillation pot,
Mhm.
and then the distillate comes up, and it's alcohol that's been
Right.
boiled, and it hits, and the chicken breast is basically hung inside of the top of the distillation dome.
Right.
So it's not quite 100 degrees centigrade. It's I forget the boiling point for alcohol, so maybe it's like
Oh yeah.
yeah, 40 C or something like that, whatever it takes, but
Mm.
that's hot enough to make it so that you're not getting poisoned by the raw chicken.
Right.
But it is a raw chicken breast, and over the course of the distillation, it'll end up getting cooked, but it's kind of like a slow cooking. So
Cool. So I mean, that's good to know, is that some mezcals are not vegan.
yes, exactly. If you're vegan, you definitely need to know that. There are some mezcals that are definitely not vegan, and pechugas almost never vegan. I have seen one place that did a vegan pechuga, but it's not typical.
Yeah. You got to have that raw chicken in there.
Yeah, exactly. So
I'm really interested to try something like that. What did you say that brand was again? That
this
Pachuga?
one is Don
always
Mateo. Yeah, this one is Don Mateo. I really like this brand. It's got of their pechuga. It's got a great flavor. So
Okay.
yeah.
So the ones that I picked up, this one so far, this is the one I'm liking. a lot.
Monte Lobos, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's nice. It's to me that is what mezcal kind of tastes like. You know what I
Yeah, and
mean? It's like
it says joven, which means young. So I assume that means it's not aged a whole lot.
right, right. They're typically like rested, but not aged.
Okay.
And they basically would advise that you drink it neat. If you're going to make a cocktail out of it, fine. But if you're going to drink it neat, they're typically going to serve it in a thing like this. It's a little like clay cup,
Right. Hmm.
or they'll serve it in just a little glass. And it's like everywhere you go there. Yeah, 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 yeah. Exactly, exactly. Also, everywhere you go there are crosses on and in every.
Oh, of course there are. Yeah. So my father's Puerto Rican, so I grew up. I couldn't have a conversation without being blessed Virgin Mary.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
I am totally unsurprised to see crosses in the bottom of the glass.
Yeah, like when they're doing the fermentation, they'll like stick one in there. It was like, okay, this will be a good batch. Okay, this will be a good batch.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting point. Is neat the generally accepted way of drinking mezcal, or is it
Yep.
mixing it on the rocks, with something else in it? Is it
If you're going to make a cocktail out of it, I think that's something that is quite common. But most people, when they're going to drink mezcal, are just going to drink it neat.
okay?
Yeah, and when I say most people, when they drink it, most people in Mexico, when they're drinking mezcal, are probably just going to drink it neat. The adding water or putting it on rocks is just not common. Personally, probably my favorite cocktail right now with mezcal is a paloma. Having like that grapefruit flavor just goes really well with it. The other thing I've been playing around with a bunch is a variation like on the last word, which is typically a gin, and then it's got chartreuse, Luxardo, and lime. And so I've been adjusting for the citrus. Sometimes I put grapefruit in. Sometimes I'll actually use pineapple because pineapple and mezcal goes really well together. And then I've been getting rid of the Luxardo and I use a ginger liqueur instead of that. And then I switch to
Interesting.
yellow chartreuse. And so the same like, last word ratio of like 1.5, 1.57575. And it's just like that to me is, as a cocktail, is like a shaken cocktail. It's just so good.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So in neat, then is it room temperature? I would assume.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Room temperature. Yeah.
Yeah, and these are pretty palatable at room temperature. The one I haven't shown you yet that I got is one that has been aged a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know that. I've never had that.
It's Nucano, Oaxaca. It's Espadin, 100% Espadin,
Mm-hmm.
and Añejo 3 años, so three years.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. So they're aging it to get some of that barrel flavor.
I was gonna say it looked a little
Yeah.
bit darker than the ones you've thrown out.
And
Yeah,
I'm assuming they're just using oak barrels like you would other spirits. I don't know.
that's what I would assume. Yeah, I was going to mention one other thing that as you're deciding on what you're going to be drinking, a couple of things to look for. Sometimes the labels will be like encyclopedic, like this, and it's like minuscule print, so it's really hard in a dark bar to figure out what it is. Plus, it's always in Spanish, and so as a non-Spanish speaker, it's pretty rough. But
Right.
but basically, the stuff that they'll talk about is where it was, who did it, the agaves that they used. So this bottle that I'm looking at, which is Mezcaloteca, which is a brand, this particular bottle is just Espadin. And then they talk about how they crushed it. So molienda, tina de fermentación. So how they fermented it. So this one it says Madera de Ocote, so OCOTE. So whatever wood that is, the type of water that they use. So they have agua used, the distillation. So then this is another thing is that depending upon the labeling that they have for the mezcal, it might be an ancestral mezcal. And with ancestral mezcals, you can only use clay pots in order to actually do the distillation from. Newer ways, they'll use copper for the actual distillation pot too. And then they will also sometimes use stainless because it's more sort of like an industrial sort of thing. Then they have here a number of distillations. This one says Ajuste de Riqueras Alcohólica. So basically it says puntas y colas, so heads and tails. So I actually have a couple of bottles of heads, which unlike most distillation has very low methanol. The normal distillation, you get loads of methanol in the heads, but you don't actually get that on the agave. At least that's what I've been told. I haven't broken out any testers or anything like that to see that. And then this one, it says basically like how many liters were produced. So this particular one, I was at Mezcaloteca in Oaxaca, and I asked for basically like their smokiest mezcal. I wanted the one that actually still had the most smoke flavor in it. So that was the one. I'll mention one other thing. I showed this already with the amount of produced, but this one is like a really rare agave. This is from an area called Santa Catarina Minas, and this is actually a rare agave that pretty much is from that particular area. So they call it San Martinero, is the type of agave. And so yeah, it's just a pretty interesting thing. And this particular Palenque, this brand is Real Minero. Is the brand out of Minas. And if you do go to Oaxaca, if you get a chance, their Palenque is probably the most beautiful one that I've seen. It's really, really nice. It's like they also have like a seed preservation program where they're trying to like classify and make sure that they're replenishing and doing a really good job with the cultivation. And it's like they have to go back out into the wildlands and like replant the stuff in order to make sure that there's agave like going forward.
What was it, Iceland that has that huge seed bank?
Yes.
That they could we could populate another Earth if we needed to with the
I think we're sending that to Mars. I think that's the plan.
That's awesome. So speaking of Oaxaca, obviously that's pretty central to mezcal, because I'm looking at these bottles and I'm seeing something I've never seen on other liquor bottles. I'm seeing these little security looking tags here where we've got QR codes. It says Oaxaca right below the QR codes.
Yep.
This one's wrapped around. This one is just kind of randomly placed.
Yep.
This one is sideways, but they all have that same like label of authenticity. It's a little it's hard to see. I don't have a lot of light in here, but it's like a hologram.
Yeah. I've got another one here. So my understanding about this is maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, there was a law that went into effect, and it was probably in process for a while before that. Is they basically did that naming control, and so there are only a couple of states in Mexico where you're actually allowed to produce something and then call it mezcal. So Michoacan, Oaxaca. Durango, I can't remember all of them, but Oaxaca is like the primary one, but Michoacan is another state that has a lot of that production coming out of it. And so it's just the country has gotten it together and is really working hard to make sure that, if they're going to do that, they're going to protect the thing. And it's like you can't call sparkling wine champagne unless it's champagne in France. And it's like they did that, and so the mezcal term, you can call something mezcal if it meets certain characteristics. And then there's actually another distinction called traditional mezcal, which is with traditional mezcal, like you can use the copper distillation pots, but you can't use stainless steel if you're going to call it traditional. And then there's ancestral mezcal, so like from the ancestors, which is you have to use clay pots and you can't use any sort of like mechanical shredding. But it's like maybe that means that you can't even use the donkeys. You have to use the hammer thing. I can't remember with that one exactly what the distinction is. But so there are 3 labels: mezcal, traditional mezcal, and ancestral mezcal. So,
Wow.
yeah.
When we show up to audit you, you better be out there sweating, hauling away.
That's
I
right.
want to see
That's
no
right.
donkey in there.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So what's the taste profile? If you could, talk about it compared to another liquor, from a, usually vodkas are pretty neutral, but and gins are very junipery depending on where you're getting from. Whiskey has a full flavor profile. Rum is, got a profile. Is there anything out there that's similar, or is it stand on its own and it just is unique?
Well, so like I definitely get the hotness of the neutral spirit, right? I mean, I definitely like when I'm drinking mezcal, I get a thing that reminds me of vodka in terms of alcohol. It doesn't taste like alcohol. I'm sorry, it doesn't taste like vodka, but I get that like burn from alcohol. The thing that I tend to think about for mezcal's flavor profile, which is actually the palate's pretty broad. It's not like a singular thing.
I would agree.
Yeah, there tends to be on the nose. There tends to be like a caramelized sugar, sort of an initial thing. And then sometimes you'll get a little bit of some like citrusy kind of flavors, depending upon when, if they sort of retain that. When I sip it, I tend to get a little bit of earthiness, depending upon the type of agave used. Then there's like this sort of stone fruit to like a grassy kind of flavor. There's a range in that sort of like initial taste thing. And then a lot of times after that, I'll get this like the heat, just of the alcohol coming in, because a lot of this stuff is like 90 to 110 proof. It's like it's really high alcohol. But then after that, it's kind of interesting. What I find I end up with at the end of it is more of like a sugary sort of like it just lingers on my tongue, and it feels like after I take that sip and let it sit there, I get like maybe 20 or 30 seconds. So for me, that like flavor experience in terms of the complexities is way more in the whiskey space than it is like in the gin, the vodka, any of that. It's got like 3 or 4 different things going on that you have to kind of sit there and think about it. So
having tried it for the first time, it is pretty difficult to put into words. But if you think of a peated, like a high-end tequila, but then a peated tequila, like that kind of gets you in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I think it's fair, and I think same sort of thing. The way that peated scotches are made, or peated whiskeys, wherever you're going to make it, is you're going to use peat smoke to be able to dry the grain that you're then going to ferment.
Right.
And I mean, like that's how it imparts that, and the agave is smoked mostly because they're cooking it so that they can then process the sugar through fermentation. So yeah, you're getting that same sort of thing, and it's just this like really wonderfully complex kind of sequence of flavors is what I like. And I mean, if I'm going to sit down and drink some mezcal, I usually after the 4th one, like I can't really taste it anymore. Like it's hard, you know what I mean? It's like really hard because it's such a challenging experience from your taste buds to be like, whoa, wait a minute, what was that? Did that
I've killed almost probably more than a pint of water just trying to cleanse my palate between the food that I've got here. My tongue is it's getting pretty rough.
And I mean, so you've had like 3 different glasses, right? But it's like all of a sudden now it's just hard to keep it straight. And you're like, where, is that something that?
But at that point you don't care, so it's fine.
Well, after 4 or 5, it's just like, okay, like good. I'm gonna switch to a cocktail, or I'm gonna chill out, and like I'm gonna go get whatever. But for me, like if I'm gonna sit down and drink mezcal, maybe 4 or 5 is the best. Actually, you asked me where I am in DC. There's a place that is open called Espita, they've got a really nice mezcal selection. There's another place though that I've probably sampled more mezcals than anywhere else, and it's called La Puerta, and it is in San Diego. And the reason for that is they have a fantastic mezcal selection, and they have a killer happy hour where it's 50% off all alcohol. No matter
Wow.
how much the glass is, 50% off from like whatever the time is, like 4 to 7 or something like that. So like when I'm
So
in
they know you. It's safe to say that they know you.
at least a couple of those bartenders will recognize me. It's kind of weird. I travel a bunch, you know. I mean, working in this industry, that's kind of the way it is. You go to places. I tend to haunt places when I go there, but I show up and people are like, "Did you have long hair?"
Yeah.
Yeah, I had long hair. They're like, "How long has it been?" I was like, 2 years. They're like, "What?" I'm like, "Yeah." You know? But yeah, so La Puerta is a great place to sample stuff, but it's super complex. So, you know, in your question of like, what does it taste like? It smells like almost like a sugary sweet cactus kind of beverage. And then I get this like sequence of different flavors, and the earthiness I think is another thing that is really important to kind of underscore. Like I get a lot of like clay mineral kind of stuff in the tasting. And then depending upon what they did with it, you know, you get other things in terms of accentuating flavors. I did have something the last time I was there where they told me that the place where they did their distillation, there were loads and loads and loads of hot peppers around, and I got spice, like pepper spice.
Just absorbed it from the air.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it was, but that was interesting. And they're like, all of this particular places mezcals have that flavor, and maybe it's just like, you know, how they do it, or it's the stuff that's in the air. Or, you know, they're putting.
Yeah, I mean that's wild. Like, yeah, I'm looking at this one. It says wild fermentation.
Yeah.
I mean that's how you ruin a batch of beer. You know, so to me,
Unless you're
It
Belgian,
depends
right?
on what you're going for.
to me, it's
Farm ale, sours, right? Those are all wild
Mm.
fermentation.
right. Yeah, to me, it's like it didn't even occur to me that you could do wild fermentation and have it turn out okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I literally everywhere that I've been, when they're doing fermentation, it's just like they got like 4 bats of it, so 4 big vats of it sitting right over there.
Wow.
So someone like me who has no clue what they're doing, and I'm walking into a liquor store,
Mhm.
what would be number one recommendation? Just this has got a pretty good taste. It's not super expensive. It's worth your while. What would that product look like?
So if someone said to me, like, I've never had it before, I want to taste what mezcal tastes like, I would recommend the Del Maguey Vita. Um, it looks like this. It is sort of their lower end of mezcal. It will give you sort of the generic baseline of what mezcal kind of tastes like. After that, so that would be the Vita is going to have a lot of espadine in it. I would look for one other bottle, and I would look for something that when you look at what the type of agave is, try to find one that isn't espadine. So as an example, this one, and I'll put it up there, and it's probably mirror image, but Tepezate. So this has no espadine in it at all, and these bottles will like sort of vary widely in terms of what they end up being. So if you want to be really adventurous, find something that is definitely not an espadine.
Okay.
And then the last thing I would suggest is, if you can find it, find a pechuga. So like one of the pechugas is going to be sort of the combination of the 2 distillations that you get. So you get that agave flavor, you get that standard mezcal flavor, but then the 3rd distillation adds additional flavors, whatever the person doing the distillation decides that they want to add to it. But a lot of times it's like oranges and apples, and then a bunch of other things. Unless you're vegan, if you're vegan, don't get that one, because that one has meats in it. So,
Okay.
yeah. So that would be what I would recommend, is like three bottles. Vita as like baseline, something that's way more adventurous. And the way you find that is just not espadine. And then the third one is a pechuga, because it's basically the flavoring. And actually, Adrian, you did kind of the same thing by going with an aged mezcal, which is like a lot less typical to have something that's barrel aged. But having that one gives you sort of exactly, has you like have the additional barrel aged flavors. So.
Yeah, I actually wouldn't recommend it. This to me tastes like mezcal that somebody screwed up, because like you get that, you still get that mezcal flavor, but it tastes like somebody's blended it with like a really young bourbon, which is not, I don't think it's doing the mezcal any favors. I don't think it's helping. This is my favorite out of the three that I grabbed.
And that, to me, that Montelobos is like the equivalent of the Vita that I was recommending. You know what I mean? Where it's just like baseline. It's the standard. The one that you got, which was the Del Maguey, you got the Chichicapa, which I have here, a bottle of their Monero. But the Chichicapa is basically a single village. Someone has done. It's sort of their more artisanal version rather than their Vita, which is their kind of like.
This was good too.
Montelobos, yeah.
And to give you an idea, Jeremy, this one is 43.2%. So this one's fairly low for these. This one is higher. This one is where was it? 48%. This guy. So it's pretty hot. It doesn't taste that hot though.
Okay.
They're hot though.
This one's only 40. So again, I feel like, so the only reason I got this is because it was a comfortable color, because it was a color of
familiar.
Stuff.
You're like whiskey. Oh,
Right. Like, oh, that's a familiar color. Everything else here is
white.
Is clear. And generally, I don't get real excited over clear liquors.
Right.
So I was like, one of them I'll get a comforting brown, and it's the biggest disappointment.
My experience with the barrel aged mezcals is I generally don't like them. But I mean, that's sort of my flavor profile, because if I'm going to have something barrel aged, I'm going for like a whiskey that's an old whiskey. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to want that kind of barrel aging, as opposed to something that's been in a barrel for a few years. So,
yeah,
awesome.
Great. Well, cool.
Chris,
thank you for that. That tour through Mezcal. That was amazing. I love just getting that brained up, all that information on.
Happy to.
Yeah,
Next time you're in DC, you holler at me. I have about 30 bottles we could say.
Awesome. Yeah,
So,
it's been a couple of years, but
yeah, exactly.
So do we want to do a little bit of news, Jeremy? And
I think let's push it to the next episode.
Okay.
I think this one was very informative, and
it was
a lot of good information, and so we'll do the news next time and move on. So,
and I forgot to share. This is what that one
Nice.
came in.
Yeah, nice.
Fancy.
Yeah.
It's like the Scotch
woven basket. Except
Yeah.
that they come.
it's like a woven basket.
That's cool.
Yeah, Oaxaca is well known for their textiles as well. It's a really, really interesting area. So
I thought that was cool. It didn't feel gimmicky, like a lot of containers and boxes feel gimmicky. It felt right.
Sweet. But yeah, thank you guys. I'm glad that we finally got a chance to make this happen. I'm happy to, happy to share what I know about the stuff. And like I said, I just drink it a lot. So
I very much appreciate it, because I was like, Mezcal, I don't know what the hell that is. Sure, why not? I mean,
yeah, thanks for coming on.
Okay,
This was awesome.
Really appreciate it, guys.
thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Have a good one.
You too.
Ciao.
Thanks, everybody.